I remember back when I was about 5 years old in the mid-80s, my parents and I were living with my maternal grandparents in Japan in a prefecture called Chiba. One cold winter Sunday morning, I woke up to my grandparents in their pajamas standing by the glass sliding doors, telling me to get up and look outside. They looked like they had a surprise for me. I quickly got up out of the futons we were sleeping in and looked outside through the foggy glass, and just as the weather forecast had predicted the night before, it had snowed overnight. This moment was my very first time seeing snow. What made it even more special was that it's somewhat rare for it to snow during the winter in Chiba. My grandmother told me that I could go outside for a bit if I wore something warm first. So I put on my sweater, unlocked the doors, and opened them just enough so that I could slip outside without upsetting my grandparents by letting all the cold air in. As soon as I stepped outside and quickly closed the door behind me, I noticed that it was still snowing. I felt the icy cold veranda on my bare feet, and my hands and face started to cool down very quickly. I smelt the cold winter air, if that makes sense. I paused for a moment to take it all in because what I saw then took my white breath away. The front yard had completely changed. I realized that I had stepped out into a world covered in a blanket of pure, untouched, spotless white snow. Everything was covered in a few inches of snow. Everything from our front yard to the roofs of our neighbors' houses. Everything had turned pure white. I slipped into my grandmother's icy cold sandals because they were much smaller than my grandfather's, and slowly took my first step forward into the snow. It almost felt like I was walking on another planet for the very first time. That's one small step for me, one core memory for my childhood. Then I took another step, then another, and another. I can still remember the sound the snow made and how it felt as I took those steps. It was a surreal experience. I took a few more steps until I was standing in the center of our now white front yard. I turned around to see my footsteps. I felt proud of myself for being the first member of my family to have created them. Since the snow was still falling, I decided to look up, and what I saw then was what seemed like countless, fluffy, slightly gray-colored chunks of lint falling from the bright white sky. It was such a strange sight to behold. As I continued to watch the snowfall, I noticed that it didn't seem to fall fast and straight down like raindrops, so I was able to keep my eyes wide open and enjoy the sensations of the snow gently land on my face. The snowfall's path down to earth seemed to sway from side to side or move around in circles like how some feathers would fall. The sheer beauty of it all filled me with such an overwhelming feeling of gratitude, so I stretched my arms wide open at the sky, almost as if I was attempting to become one with it. It felt like nature had orchestrated all of this just for me as a gift. The slow snowfall also gave the visual effect that not only did the world turn into something so beautiful and pure, but time had also slowed down so that everything was happening in slow motion, just so that I could savor every precious moment that I was given. I opened my mouth to try and land some snow on my tongue. After a few seconds, I felt some snow fall into my mouth, so I closed it to see if I could taste anything, but I couldn't. I thought maybe if I had a mouthful of it, I should be able to taste something. So I looked down again at the snow around me and ducked down while being careful as to not let my pajama pants touch the snow. Using my right hand, I took a scoop of snow and placed it into my mouth. I've never felt so happy tasting something so cold and flavorless. As the snow melted in my mouth, I noticed also that due to the nature of this snowfall, unlike raindrops, it was hardly making a sound when it landed. So, I closed my eyes to see if I could hear any sound at all, and I think I was able to hear some of the snow around me land, but it was a very faint sound. I stood back up and walked to the edge of our front yard and leaned on the steel fence. I turned to my right and then to my left. At this point, I was able to see that our entire street and the few empty parking spots across the road were also completely covered in snow, and it was yet to be ruined with human footsteps or tire marks. There was something so calming about seeing the world around me covered in snow. It was almost as if the snow had purified the world, and that we were given the second chance to start over with a clean slate, but this time everything was going to be done right. I took a deep breath and exhaled just to watch how far my white breath could travel into the cold air before disappearing. And then suddenly I was reminded of all the scenes of snowy winters from the Japanese movies and TV shows that I've watched thus far. I told myself at that moment that I must make myself my very first snowman, and it must be a big 3-ball snowman. Making a snowman on the road wouldn't be a good idea, but to make one on one of the empty parking spots would be acceptable. As I was choosing which parking spot to go to, I heard the sliding door open. My grandmother poked her head out and told me to come inside for breakfast. As I went inside and inhaled my breakfast, all I could think about was going back outside before the neighborhood kids did, so that I could make a snowman with the maximum amount of snow that I could gather. After being told numerous times by my grandmother to watch my step and to stay warm, I put on my rain boots and my gloves and stepped back outside on a mission. My mission was to make a big, pure white 3-ball snowman. I carefully walked down the concrete steps, crossed the road, and arrived at the parking spots. I turned around again to see my footsteps. This time I felt so proud of myself for being the first one on the entire street to have made them. Now I needed to choose a spot to build my snowman. So I chose the parking space on the left because it was the closest to my place, and picked a particular spot in that space where my snowman was going to be made. I started gathering snow into that spot to form a big pile of pure white snow. I quickly realized that every time I dug a little too deep, the dirt from under the snow got mixed in. So, I started gathering snow by only scooping it from the surface. But since there was only a few inches of snow, this was already proving to be difficult and time-consuming. I now had to decide between having a big pile of dirty snow or a small pile of pure white snow. Both options involved having to make a compromise I wasn't willing to make. As I was trying to come to a painful decision, I started to hear the excited voices of a boy and a man from a few houses down, quickly making their way to the parking spots. I figured they had the same idea as I did. I closed my eyes and let out a big sigh. My plans were starting to fall apart, and on top of that, I was now in a hurry to come to a decision so that I could move forward. When I heard them coming around the corner, I reluctantly turned and greeted them with a fake smile, knowing full well that I wanted to have all the snow in the parking spots for myself. But they were now getting in the way of my plans. I knew then that I couldn't be selfish and made sure not to scoop up any more snow from the areas away from my parking spot. I decided to gather as much snow as possible while trying my best not to mix in too much dirt. As I continued to gather more snow, I knew for certain that due to the lack of snow around me, I wouldn't be able to make a large 3-ball snowman that I initially planned on making. My snowman was most likely going to be a small 2-ball snowman. Also, most of the snow I gathered were not purely white due to the dirt being mixed in, so I knew that my small 2-ball snowman was going to look quite dirty. I did my best to ignore my disappointment and push forward. Eventually, I had a somewhat decent pile of snow and started creating the 2-ball shape. Once it had the overall shape, I used a few small rocks that I found nearby as eyes and a nose, and broke off some thin branches from the trees in our neighbor's front yard to create a mouth and arms. My first big, pure white 3-ball snowman I set out to make turned out to be my first small and dirty 2-ball snowman. By this time, I was tired, hot, and sweaty, and the initial excitement and enthusiasm that came from what I had envisioned my first snowman was going to be had faded away. I stood there in front of my snowman for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I had failed my mission. I waved my snowman goodbye. As I turned to walk away, I noticed that there were now several kids and their parents making their own snowman on the other parking spots adjacent to mine. I was so lost in my own little world that I didn't even notice the arrival of this many people. They seemed to be having a blast, even though they were also using dirty snow to build their own snowman. I was confused by their lack of perfectionism, and as to how they were able to maintain their level of excitement and enthusiasm, even though their circumstances were also less than ideal. As I was walking across the street, I was surprised to see that about a third of the neighborhood were out on the road building their own snowman or having friendly snow fights. The road was now littered with people's footsteps, and I was no longer able to find the first footsteps that I had created. The street was quickly losing the natural beauty that it gained overnight. On my way up the stairs, I started reflecting on where it was that I went wrong with my snowman. I realized that I should have just gathered as much snow as possible from the beginning, regardless of how much dirt was mixed in. And once my snowman had the overall shape of a 3-ball snowman, a layer of pure white snow should have been added as a finishing touch to give it the appearance that the whole thing was made of pure white snow, inside and out. I regretted focusing too much on making sure from the very beginning that the snowman was going to be pure white, while not considering the scarcity of the amount of snow readily available, or the fact that I was given limited time since I was not the only resident living on that street. Maybe the neighborhood kids and adults knew that it wasn't about making a perfect snowman. It was just about going outside, having fun together, and creating memories. Being a 5-year-old, this was quite a harsh lesson that I was still in the process of understanding. I arrived home feeling completely defeated and was told by my grandmother to wash my hands and get changed into some dry clothes. As the days went by without any more snowfall, whenever I walked past my dirty snowman, I saw that it continued to fall apart and melt down into a smaller pile of dirty snow that only somewhat resembled what it once was, until one day it was completely gone except for a few rocks, some sticks, and a fading memory. Looking back now, I think what happened was that I ignored my lack of experience with snow while focusing excessively on my unrealistically high expectations of something that was to be created in an imperfect world, which ultimately ended in failure and consequently led to a great deal of disappointment and regret. It's been almost 40 years now since that day, but I still remember it so clearly. I only have faint memories of other snow-related moments from Japan. I guess that's because they weren't as special as my first time seeing snow and making my first snowman. I still remember that feeling I had back then of experiencing something wonderful for the first time. The feeling of truly living in the moment. I felt so alive then. It was such a beautiful feeling. I miss those days. I have many memories from my childhood, and this is just one of them. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching this far. More videos are in the works. If you have any good childhood memories that you would like to share, please do so. I'll be reading your comments. Thanks again. Till next time.